People ask, what's the fastest way to become a better Dark Angels player? Right now, stop playing Dark Angels. So, if you're a Dark Angels player right now, you know the drill. You play the best chapter in the game, but the meta is against us. Every tournament, club night, and game with mates feels like you're playing with one arm tied behind your back. So what on earth do we do? I'll tell you. We level up. We play the Sons of Rabute Lion Man or Dark Angel Vampires, not switching armies, just playing more meta chapters in green armor. And yeah, I know how that sounds. I didn't spend years painting Ravenwing to start proxying poxy Ultramarines. The first time my coach suggested it, I nearly hung up on him. I just refused to do it because Dark Angels are the best. After a couple of weeks, he convinced me. He showed me exactly where my decision making developed blind spots. When you play Dark Angels in a tough meta, you overcompensate. You adapt your habits around the faction's weaknesses, and those habits are costing you games. I was too focused on trying to keep my resources alive rather than letting them do their job of ramming deep into my opponent's backfield. There are three things you'll learn from other chapters. Firstly, your positioning. Second, your trading, because playing a faction that hits harder than a Tau in melee shows you where you've been getting robbed. Third, your target priority. You have to get the fundamentals right, and a big fuck off cannon helps you. More on that later. It's going to feel uncomfortable cosplaying as the poster boys or blood angels, but diamonds are made under pressure. If you keep playing Dark Angels in a bad meta, you'll get worse. You'll get more frustrated and burn out. Treat it like the lion coming back to 40k. We've got to learn and push forward. Stick with me through this, as we will break down the key fundamentals that most players in your local meta simply won't have, letting you improve when everyone else is just getting pissed off. So let's get into it. We're going to start off by talking about transferable skills. And a lot of these are quite simple concepts, but they really help shape around what you need to be doing when you're playing your game at 40k. And they're fundamental things that I think a lot of people do miss. So it's well worth having that selection of knowledge and knowing how you can really use it to bring the pain to your opponents. Now, first one we're going to talk about is a stat check. Now, what a stat check means is putting a certain tough characteristic in front of an opponent and going, can you pass this? Passing it is either by stopping it from scoring or killing it. Very simple. If they can, they win. If they can't, you win. Simple as that. The most common way that we see that is usually like hull spam. So that might be knights. But when we are playing different chapters of Space Marines, we get the opportunity to kind of see how units deal with those different hull spam units. So like, really good example recently, we've seen some Repulsor Executioners getting a bit of love in Dark Angels. And that definitely wouldn't have happened had the Ultramarines Repulsor Executioner not been 10 times better. And now, of course, they do get the +1 to wound into whatever target they want, which is really critical for what makes them exceptional. But that's the kind of demonstration of by playing a different chapter, it teaches you something else about yourself and about how to play those Dark Angels. Now, it also helps analyze all those key strengths and weaknesses of units, but I like to think that it also really helps me when I go into those kinds of armies by knowing how Blood Angels can take that hit, what I need to do to kill the Lamarty's brick, because I've experienced other players killing the Lamarty's brick. I think that's really useful in just making sure that we get the most information possible and allowing us to really push on when those Dark Angels get into a slightly better position. Because scrapping against something that is meant to be a good matchup is never a good situation to be in. So learning about that stat check by playing it when it's in the stronger position is all the better. Now, I think there's also an element of understanding overexposure, and you will see a lot of this as Dark Angels players, because we tend to play 15 Deathwing Knights. I know I certainly do. I love them. But if you are overexposing that stat check too early, that's where you're going to lose your games. Because if you buy your opponent enough time for them to shoot into you a couple of turns, that's going to be really problematic. You can't put that stat check in front of Tau shooting for multiple turns, for example, because they will just chew through it. Oftentimes in this current meta, you can't even put them in front of it for one turn. So those kinds of things about learning what's the potential damage output of, say, an Ultramarines gun line by using it will be a lot more reliable than just going up against it once every 6 weeks, say, if you're not playing as many games as some people. So that will really help you kind of learn other Marine factions while not actually forcing you to go much outside of your comfort zone. Let's talk damage output though, because we want to try and unlock those new profiles that really shows us the really like potential of the army. Now, obviously, we've just talked about the Repulsor Executioner, but a really good example of that for me personally was when I was playing the Landspeeder Vengeance. Now, this was back when a time when Redemptor Dreadnoughts were incredibly popular within Ultramarines. They were usually taking 2 in every single list just before they got a points increase. Now, I was looking at the gun and going, okay, that gun is a lot more efficient because it's got +1 to wound, and therefore now it can both flex into vehicles while also being really good into elite infantry. What do we have that's similar? Obviously, we have the Redemptor ourselves, but can we add a cheaper platform? You can probably see where I'm going with this. That was the Landspeeder Vengeance. So I comboed that with the Stormspeeder Thunderstrike to give them that +1 to wound, and then you add in that twin linked, and suddenly we've got a really reliable firebase that only needs to roll well once on its number of shots, and then you'll be a happy individual. So seeing that from other factions and playing with that in other factions, it gives you more ideas to take back to Dark Angels, which is really critical when we are in a tough spot and we are going to have to do some rebuilding, particularly when there is a new addition just around the corner. Now, I think the third and probably the most important one is your positioning. Learning where you need to be on the board and what the job of each unit is and how it can be in a spot to do that job the best is so critical to every aspect of the game. Doesn't matter what army you're playing, you A, need to know the job of the unit, and B, you need to be able to get them into that position so that they can do their job properly, because something could be the best objective holder ever, but if it's not sitting on an objective, it's not doing its job. And that's really critical to try and understand that as soon as possible. And that positioning, by playing with either more resources or more efficient resources, as say an Ultramarine or a Blood Angel, that's going to really help you kind of transfer those skills back to Dark Angels so that when they do realize we're overcosted and we get a couple more units back, we'll be in a far happier spot. That's really critical to just make sure that we're getting exactly what we need. So, another bit on why experimenting helps. Now, obviously, we've kind of talked a little bit about how traditionally we are very good into power armor. That's always been my opinion. We're good into your Blood Angels, we're good into your Ultramarines, all that kind of thing. The Lion is a really nice little pivotal point in a lot of those matchups where they don't have a 4-up invuln. So we do operate really well in those power armor metas. So by learning how those other factions play, not only do you have an army that is efficient into them, you will also know their tricks. And that tends to be the way that you might lose a game. If your opponent is able to out-knowledge you or out-skill you, then that's where a good matchup can become bad. So if you're able to avoid that by learning that matchup, by playing it yourself, all the better. Then when you come to that game, you'll be just as comfortable facing into them. It's a real edge that I think a lot of people underestimate. It massively helps me when I play into, say, like a CSM, or an Emperor's Children, a Thousand Sun, Death Guard, because I've had that experience of playing them myself and being able to kind of learn the tricks and what they're trying to do to bully me off those objectives and to execute their plan. It allows me to kind of execute mine around them and force them to start playing my game, which is really where you start winning those games. Playing the alternative Marines, it really does help you know your enemy. And I think that's a really powerful thing when we know that some form of Marines are always going to be good. There's never a meta where a faction of Space Marines is absolutely terrible or a Marine equivalent armor is absolutely terrible. It just doesn't happen because it might be a CSM, it might be a Death Guard, all those kinds of things. Yes, there are slight changes in those data sheets and all that kind of thing, but fundamentally, it's a very similar profile, and that will really help by learning those different profiles, learning that playstyle. Obviously, you don't need to run out and go and buy a Death Guard army. That would be a bit silly, but you have the models for a Space Marine army already. So you might as well, right? I also think something's really critical with this, and it's fatigue can be really poor. I know there was a period where I decided that I just didn't want to play Dark Angels for a bit because they were just in such a bad spot. It was genuinely unenjoyable. This current period is kind of similar. I'm playing a lot more teams, which isn't really giving me the opportunity to play Dark Angels as much as I would like, and I do definitely miss them. But it's disappointing seeing the meta in its current shape for Dark Angels. Obviously, in many ways, the meta's quite good. It's really healthy. There's lots of variance. You know, I know there's obviously there's some offenders in there, but there always probably will be. Can't really think of a meta which was overly balanced apart from the one just before Catan. It's still a shame for those Dark Angels. So we want to not focus on those negatives. And like, if you can enjoy the fact that GW has massively screwed up and printed some bonkers Space Marine datasheet, perfect. Go do it. Victrix Honor Guard, best example ever, because it feels like you're cheating. It's hilarious. They are utterly stupid. Imagine playing them with 4 wounds. That must have been bonkers. I think I played them for like 1 game with 4 wounds and they were just stupid. But like, even now, they're still so exceptionally good. And all those movement tricks you can pull off in Ultramarines just make it all the more obnoxious. So, like, enjoy the dumb broken thing. Inner Circle companions look a lot like Victrix, which brings us on to another really good point of, like, what might you need to buy? Now, I know resources can be a serious thing when it comes to Warhammer. This is not a cheap hobby, and it's okay to proxy. I think as long as you speak to your local TO, it's very unlikely that people are going to be funny about proxying. You just got to make sure that you get your war gear right. An Inner Circle companion looks a heck of a lot like a Victrix Honor Guard. You know, there's no huge difference. A Blade Guard veteran looks quite different to a Victrix Honor Guard because it's got the shield. And that is usually an identifier of an extra wound or a 4-up in them. So that becomes problematic. But an Inner Circle companion does not have that, which then kind of goes, cool, this is very similar. They're both armed with a mastercrafted power weapon. Excellent. There we go. Done. Fine. It's just a slightly different one, slightly more themed to Dark Angels. I do it all the time, and I've had no TOs have an issue with it because it's for a theme. And that's kind of allowing me to play Dark Angels while still staying competitive. Now, I put together a little buy list of like some units that are just really solid pickups to have for regardless of what you want. I put the Judicia and the Blade Guard vets in there. I would put a little question mark next to them. I've not used them a ton recently. You know, they're fine. I think if you have the option, maybe buy the ICCs rather than the Blade Guard, because ICCs, again, can be Victrix. Like, let's say that head takers come out, you could probably do Blade Guard vets as like a shield head takers. A non-shielded head taker could definitely be an ICC. There's lots of different options there. And I think, you know, we can't underestimate that ability to kind of flex across and just go, well, it's a Dark Angels themed Space Wolf army, or it's a Dark Angels themed Ultramarines army. I'm playing a lot of Dark Angels themed Ultramarines at the moment, and it certainly does help. Scouts, Incursors, Infiltrators, just really solid boxes. Get the Kill Team box for Scouts. You get 10 in there. That's 2 squads sorted. The Incursor Infiltrator box is another really good one because, again, 10 models. You get 5 Incursors, 5 Infiltrators, or 10 Incursors, 10 Infiltrators. Personally, I would do 5 and 5. If you can pick up 2 boxes, perfect. That's probably all of the Incursors and Infiltrators you will ever need. And that's just going to sort out so much of that kind of early skirmish game because they appear so often. I think throughout the entirety of 10th, they have always had a place somewhere. Standard captain characters, never a bad bet. Standard captains are pretty good in Blood Angels. They're pretty good in Wrath of the Rock. There will probably be 11th edition detachments that go, cool, let's make a standard captain really cool because they're a great data sheet. They tend to be the characters that get a lot of love in the lore. You know, that's where your Uriel Ventresses come from. Your Messanius, Captain Messanius from whatever successor chapter he's from. There's like plenty of different examples where suddenly a captain has just become like the coolest bloke ever. So they might want to start demonstrating that in the rules a little bit more. It wouldn't shock me, especially when we start seeing more references to the Amazon series and to Space Marine in general. And also standard captains can be people like Uriel Ventress. You know, there's not a huge disaster. Lazarus literally comes in a box that is just a Dark Angels captain. So don't overstress about things like that. Just make sure that you're magnetizing them, and then you can change that walk in nice and simple. Similarly, company heroes, really a very useful unit. They're solid in a bunch of different ones. Obviously, they are kind of slightly out of favor in Ultramarines to Victrix Honor Guard right now because Victrix Honor Guard are stupid good. But a lot of the time you're taking a different chapter because you want their captain-esque character. And if you are doing that, that is where company heroes can probably be quite useful because of that flat -1 to wound being really quite helpful to make sure that you're bullying your opponent quite efficiently. As I say, ICCs can be Victrix, Lazarus can be Ventress, Shrike can be a moody Dante if you really like Raven Guard, all that kind of thing. I think it's instead of Shrike, it's probably Aethon Shan that's on the right size base though, because I think that's also very critical. You need to get the right size base. So I think it's actually Shan rather than Shrike. They're all Raven Guard. They all kind of look the same. They're all just moody and emo. But just talk to your local TO. Like, most people are not going to be douchebags about this. They understand that Dark Angels are in a spot. They'll understand that you might want to experiment and you want to try new things. that should be fine. You know, there is also TTS. That's a great resource to trying those different armies. It's how I started playing Ultramarines before I decided to buy some of those models, because I was going to slightly more serious tournaments that were like, you know, home nations, internationals, where you do absolutely have to have the right models. Although ironically, home nations, you should have seen the different defilers, but more on that in a different video. So let's do some lists. Let's just kind of spitball around some ideas of what you could look like. Now, this is probably a list that you have seen a million times because it is very, very simple. But how similar can it be to what we're wanting to do? Now, I would start off by saying you will need to buy one box of Victrix Honor Guard to be able to do this, because you do need that banner. That banner is so huge that in terms of what it does for line of sight, particularly on things like WTC terrain, all that kind of thing, you do need a legitimate Victrix Honor Guard banner, and that will just sort of kind of add legitimacy to the rest of the army, because then at that point, fine, use 9 inner circle companions, you've got the champion, you've got the banner, and you've got one other guy. Like, you've shown that you've put a little bit of effort in there. Calgar, you know, he's on a 50mm base, so is Belial. Just saying. So if you don't want to shell out for Calgar, just try with Belial first, because he looks awesome and we actually want to get him off the paint desk, because he's fun and great. Uriel, again, Lazarus, fine. Just don't worry about it. Everyone's going to be fine with that. If they're not fine with that, they're also not the kind of people that you want to play regularly. You know, let people self-exclude themselves from games. That's fine. Then we've got the classic Catan captain. If you're playing Gladius Dark Angels, you probably have this dude. Tech Marine. We all want to get a Tech Marine out. Tech Marines are friggin' cool. They're great as well. Really quite useful. And someone, not mentioning any names, might have submitted a list with not a Tech Marine in the wrong unit. But I quite like the Tech Marine in this. Then we've obviously got the Combi Lieutenant. It is just one of the best units available to Ultramarines, which is, again, something that you almost certainly have. And we've got our Intercessors, our Ballistas. Repexes might be something that you don't have, but it's quite easy to get a hold of them, or just make sure you don't glue in the turret for a repulsor so that you can switch between the two. Scouts, Incursors, Wardens of Ultramar. Wardens are probably a little bit more of a pain in the bum to get a hold of, because you know, they are very specific in what they do. But equally, it's a nice little painting challenge, that one. I quite enjoyed painting them. It's fun to own the models from Space Marine. Just make sure that you're looking for the discount places, because like, they are an expensive box, because they have Titus in as well. But as I say, like, it's nice for potential painting. But if you do really want a proxy, you've already probably got an Ancient, you've got a Blade Guard veteran probably somewhere that can do a very good Matarius impression. That guy is basically just a Blade Guard. And then it's 4 28mm bases. You just need to demonstrate some power weapons on some. So like some Astra Militarum will be fine, like that you borrow from a mate. That's not disastrous at that point. So if you can't get them, just do it that way. When there weren't the models on TTS, I was using Blade Guard, an Ancient, and then 4 Scout models. So like, it's kind of absolutely fine. But Blades is probably the best way to play Space Marines right now. They are just obnoxiously good. That -1 to wound, if strength is equal, is nuts. Putting that on a Repulsor Executioner is just stupid. We know this is stupid. It's Ultramarines. They're one of the top armies for a very good reason. So let's move on. Liberator Assault Group. So we're going back, instead of going for Rage Cursed Onslaught, which I do really like. I love the idea of the Death Company Dreadnoughts, having the Blood Surge, all that kind of stuff. It's great fun. However, I do think Liberator is still probably the top dog, because it has access to Lance, has access to a whole load of really good stuff, just to put it to that very tippy top, including the Rage Cursed Onslaught Captain. Now, I've gone for Rage Cap with Stern Guard. Now, you're probably used to this because you have played the Ancient Weapons Stern Guard bomb. Absolutely fine. It's a great bomb out of Wrath of the Rock. Try it in this. It is very, very similar, and it feels that similarity, which allows you to really pop off. I love this combo. I think it's excellent. It's entertaining. It's fun. It's just solid as a rock, and it's also something you almost certainly have the models for. Dante and 6 Sangard. Yeah, unfortunately, you're probably going to have to swallow those 6 Vanguard. There's not really anything that we can go, well, there's a 40mm base that's similar. And I really hope Vanguard vets don't suddenly end up on a 40mm base. That would be very frustrating. But Sangard are really cool and pretty. So it's not a disaster. They're also quite easy to find. If you did really want to go on the cheap, you could just get some of the old sculpts and put them on a 40mm base. I'm sure people are selling those old sculpts off for cheap on places like eBay or secondhand sellers. So just have a look out for that. Then we've got Lamartis and the 10 Jump Pack Death Company. Now, obviously, you probably can get away with the new Jump Pack Chaplain in that particular role, or an upsized chaplain on a 40mm base. The 10 Jump Pack Death Company, you do need some specific weapons for that. So again, magnets, really important to use those magnets just to make sure that your loadouts can be nice and easy. If you don't want to mess around with that, fine. Just get some eviscerators, get some power fists, inferno pistols. It's not hard to find those particular bits. Again, secondhand sellers, they've got all that kind of thing. Or I think one Blood Angels upgrade sprue will do you. And we've all got JPIs lying around. They're great. So why wouldn't you? Combi Lieutenant. Oh my goodness, he's here again. What a shock. Then we've got now something that is a little bit more reminiscent of Dark Angels with their blob is 2 Sang Priests with the Blade Guard veterans. Now, I've opted for this because it's survivable 4-up invulnerable save bricks. And I really like that. I think it's really solid. I think they punch like an absolute townhouse. I don't know how a townhouse punches, but it does now. And I think it's really, really a solid way to play. Sang Priests, Apothecaries, fine, done. And also then AP3 Blade Guard vets. Ooh, and Strength 7. Oh, tasty. I really like it. Alongside the ability to give one of them fights first once per game is really nice. Intercessors, you will almost certainly have 2 JPIs. They're great. ATV, again, we've seen that so many times out of all sorts of other Dark Angels lists. Outriders. Now, Outriders, that's an opportunity to get your lovely Raven Wing on the table. Now, you don't have to strictly. You could play an Incursor or something like that, because Incursors are surprisingly good in combat, and that Haywire Mine's pretty damn useful. So it gives you those kinds of options. And then, obviously, Scouts, because Scouts are phenomenal. So that's your Liberator Assault Group one. That's one maybe if you're a little bit more full send and aggressive, that's going to give you that little itch is going to get fixed by this kind of play. I really enjoyed it when I switched to Liberator for a bit. I think it's a great detachment. I think it's a lot of fun. So then we've got Forgefather hulls. This is a little bit more of a different and a little bit more of a madcap idea, because I love Salamanders. Before I was a Dark Angels player, I was a Salamander player. Back when I was still a very casual player, I love Salamanders. I love the lore. I think they are awesome. They're great fun. And who doesn't love flamey flame boys that also are really loving and cuddly? It's just exceptional. And they're also green, which is very, very important here, because then we're still playing in green armor. That is very important to me. So we're kicking off. Obviously, we are in their detachment, which is Forgefather Seekers. We started off by taking a Librarian with 10 Immolator, 10 Infernus, and the Immolator upgrade. So the Immolator upgrade basically adds 1 to each of their shots. So you have 10 plus 10d6 shots. It's not bad, that. That's going to sting. And using that, I think, is really going to punish people. And you stick them in a Land Raider Redeemer, you drive that up, people are going to catch fire. It's going to be very, very useful when they die very fast. Then we've got a Combi Lieutenant. Oh my goodness, a Combi Lieutenant? Who'd have thought? There's crazy Combi. Oh, who'd have thought? They're in every list, like, come on. Vulcan Heastan. Well, you know that captain that we had in the last one? Well, he's doing a great impression of Vulcan Heastan now. So we've got him with 5 Stern Guard. And the point of them is to be able to give those Infernus rerolls to wound, or to give the Land Raider Redeemers rerolls to wound. It just gives you that flexibility and those options all around the place, which is really important just to make sure that your flamers are popping off, because you'll get a heck of a lot of shots. You just want to make sure that those shots are converting to wounds. We've got Intercessors. Again, what a shock. Gladiator Reapers. Now, this was partly because I wanted to prove that I will put a Gladiator chassis in a list, because obviously I'm doing a video on why I think the Lancer is really stinky, and the Lancer is really stinky, but Gladiators you can still use. Now, Gladiator Reapers are the slightly weaker version in this particular list, but they're actually just really good. They've got those Dev Wound guns. They get a lot better with that speed, and also it's just another hull for a stat check. Could you switch that to a Ballistus Dreadnought? Absolutely. There is no harm in switching that to a Ballistus Dreadnought. You're buying an extra couple of points that you can put an enhancement onto your Combi Lieutenant. There's a couple of different options you could do, or Vulcan could be upgraded to standing with company heroes instead of Sternguard. You know, it gives you that flexibility, but this was a little bit for a meme that I don't hate the Gladiator chassis, I just hate Lancers. Next, we've got the real spice, which is the Gladiator Valiant. Now, Gladiator Valiants, obviously they dropped 10 points. They're now only 150 points for that chassis, which is quite a nice little spot. But in Forgefathers, when they get within 12, suddenly all of their guns are strength 10, and they're re-rolling all of their wounds because of Vulcan. And they're re-rolling the top gun as well, because that's twin-linked regardless. So suddenly all of these strength 10, D6 plus X, if they're the melter range shots, can really get to people and really start damaging them. That's why I really like the Valiant, because suddenly it's just a Valiant. Who cares if it blows up? It's only 150 points. Shove them forward. Do that element of a stat check. If your opponent's anti-vehicle guns are shooting a Gladiator Valiant, they are not shooting a Land Raider Redeemer. And if they're not shooting a Land Raider Redeemer, you're probably killing them. So you're in a really good spot to just be able to pump out those number of shots, decently kill opponents, and because they've got assault, they get that bit of extra speed, which is one of the kind of the downfalls of the Gladiator chassis. They're just a little bit slow with that 10-inch move, so getting them a little bit faster will ensure that they can actually deliver what you want. Next, we've got 2 Land Raider Redeemers, and that's because Land Raider Redeemers are friggin' awesome. Everyone should play Land Raiders. They're great fun. There is nothing more entertaining than driving a Land Raider up the board and just going, come on, deal with me. Especially when it's a Redeemer and you can just go, cool, I'm gonna park this here, and if you move anywhere near me, I'm going to Overwatch. Is it worth 50 points more than a standard Land Raider? Absolutely not. Is it really cool? Hell yes. So that's why I love seeing it. Land Raider Redeemers in general are just freaking awesome. They're just so much fun. And can you tell that I like Land Raider Redeemers? I took them to my first Super Major, all that kind of thing. I think they're brilliant. And I think in so many different terrain setups, they are just really solid. Obviously, there is a rumor that we might be getting a new Land Raider chassis. Woo! I don't know. I've not heard anything concrete, so can't comment. If you've got Land Raiders, use them. If you don't have Land Raiders, borrow them. Check in with your local Custodes player, because they've been playing triple Land Raider for however long, and now that's kind of dropped off a cliff. So they might have a couple of Land Raiders spare for you. And then, oh my goodness, would you believe it? Some scouts to end the list. What a shock. So that's going to give you the flexibility to kind of mess around with different chapters, learn new skills, learn how to be a fast, tanky gun line, learn how to be the best army in the game because you're playing Ultramarines, or just run at people. And the Run It Straight challenge is pretty good fun. Definitely try that. I love a bit of Mephiston in there as well. I left him out because obviously it's another model that you'd need to buy. But Mephiston's pretty cool. He's a great little painting project. He looks dope. And he's pretty punchy with that 4-up Feel No Pain. It's quite funny. I enjoy a little bit of Mephiston. Load up and 4-up Feel No Pain. Solid. I think he's great. So look, hopefully this has given you an insight on why playing those different chapters can actually be super useful for you. I've done it a few times. It's really helped me with burnout as well. And to be honest, that's probably one of the most important things about this. You don't want to burn out. And knowing when you just need to pop the Dark Angels away for a little bit because you're getting frustrated and you're getting pissed off, it's fine to do that. You know, the Lion would understand. And when you come back, he'll be very proud of you still. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed this. Come join the Discord, give us a like, give us a subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Drop a comment down below. Let me know about the different chapters that you would like to play. Are there any that you're particularly interested in seeing a list out of me for? All that kind of stuff. It really helps the channel. The more you do that, the more of this silliness I get to do. It's been really taking off. So the more that we're pushing it, make sure you're coming back because we've got a really exciting series with another big influencer. So keep a check of that because that'll be coming out in the next few weeks. It'll also be over on his channel as well. So yeah, I think it's been a really good fun one. I'm playing Ultramarines this weekend and the next weekend after. I'm not excited, it's Ultramarines. But anyway, go out there, play with your Space Marines, play them the best way you can possibly. And if that's not Dark Angels, it will still be helping you get more skilled. And that is really the most critical part. Alongside that, stay loyal, brothers, and we'll see you in the next one. Hopefully when Dark Angels are a little bit better.